The winter of 1324 arrived early in the Holy Roman Empire, sweeping across the Rhine Valley with a kind of merciless purpose, as though the cold itself sought to remind the people how small they were beneath the weight of God, kings, and the ever-tightening grip of fear. Villagers of Falkenstadt whispered that this year's frost felt different, heavier, the sort of chill that didn't simply settle on rooftops but seeped into bone and conscience. And on a morning draped in pale, sickly sunlight, that chill was made manifest in the most dreadful sight the town had witnessed in years. A procession moved down the narrow cobblestone road, silent, slow, and terrible. No bells rang. No herald spoke. Only the crunching of boots in snow and the muffled sobs that escaped the covered mouths of onlookers. At its center walked a woman in a torn wool dress, her wrists bound by iron, her long auburn hair tangled and dusted with frost. Her name was Elisabeth von Holzberg, daughter of a minor nobleman, and once known in Falkenstadt for her kindness, her delicate embroidery, and a peculiar habit of reading Latin texts not meant for women's eyes. But none of those things mattered now. The chains gave her a new identity, one that erased everything she had been, a woman accused. Behind Elizabeth, a wagon creaked under the weight of various instruments, wood, iron leather straps, sharpened stakes, tools that the townspeople recognized but never dared speak of aloud. They were instruments of correction, instruments of order, instruments of obedience. A shudder crept through the watching crowd. No one stepped forward to speak on her behalf. No one dared. The bishop's envoys had arrived the night before, carrying parchment sealed in crimson wax, declaring Elizabeth guilty of sacrilege, moral corruption, and sedition, charges grave enough to stain the reputation of her entire bloodline. Yet the townspeople whispered something different. They whispered about the night the baron's son had cornered her in the garden. They whispered about how Elizabeth had fought back. They whispered that the noble house, humiliated, sought to bury the scandal beneath a punishment severe enough to frighten every woman for miles. Whether the whispers were true scarcely mattered. Truth bowed to power, and in medieval Europe, power settled disputes faster than any priest or court ever could. As Elizabeth stumbled on the icy path, a sharp crack echoed. The staff of Sir Reinhard, the lord's appointed enforcer, striking the frozen ground. "Stand upright," he growled, though his gaze flickered with something like discomfort. He had known her since she was a child. Once, she had gifted him an embroidered handkerchief with the crest of their town stitched in gold. Now, he held her life by a chain wrapped around his gauntlet. "I am upright," Elizabeth answered in a steady voice, one far calmer than expected. Her lips trembled with cold, but her spine remained straight as she walked. The dignity she carried clung to her more tightly than the tattered wool. Children peeked from behind their mother's skirts, eyes wide. Many had never witnessed a public correction. Only the elders in town understood what was coming. Women with lines etched deep into their foreheads, their gazes lowered, their bodies stiff with memories they wished had been allowed to die with the past. One of those women, Marta the midwife, stood near the front. Her face tightened as she watched Elizabeth approach. Marta had helped bring half the village into the world, and she remembered Elizabeth as a bright little girl who asked more questions than most priests knew how to answer. As Elizabeth passed her, Marta whispered under her breath, "Forgive us, child. God forgive us all." Elizabeth did not turn, but her eyes blinked rapidly, as though holding back tears she refused to let fall. When the procession reached the public square, the air shifted, the way it does when a building creaks before collapsing or when a storm gathers just out of sight. A raised wooden platform stood at the center, dusted with frost. A thick post had been erected at its center, fitted with iron rings. Torches burned on either side, their flames struggling against the wind. Sir Reinhard motioned for her to halt. The bishop's envoy stepped forward, a thin man cloaked in velvet, his lips pale and his eyes half-lidded. His voice echoed across the square. Elizabeth von Holzberg, he intoned. You stand accused of acts unbecoming your station, of violating the natural order established by God and his earthly representatives. You have spoken words that defy obedience. You have resisted correction. For these transgressions, you shall undergo the punishment decreed to restore moral balance and protect the virtue of all women in Christendom. He gestured toward the wagon of instruments, and a collective gasp rolled through the crowd. Elizabeth's pulse thudded in her ears. She had known punishment was coming, humiliation, at the very least, perhaps exile her father paid dearly enough. But those instruments, some were used only in the rarest, most brutal sentences. Her throat tightened. She forced herself to breathe. Do you have any words before judgment is carried out? The envoy asked. Elizabeth lifted her head. Snowflakes clung to her lashes. I have spoken nothing but the truth, she said. I have harmed no one. And if knowledge is a crime, then there will come a day when this whole land drowns in darkness of its own making. A ripple of unease swept through the square. The envoy frowned. Defiance until the end, I see. But Sir Reinhardt's jaw tightened. His fingers twitched at the chain. He could not meet her eyes anymore. Begin, the envoy commanded. 2 guards stepped forward, seizing Elizabeth's arms. She did not struggle, though the cold iron cut into her wrists. They dragged her toward the post at the center of the platform. The crowd watched, frozen in place, helpless, horrified, complicit. Marta clasped her hands together, knuckles white. God have mercy, she whispered. And then a horn sounded from the north gate. Sharp, urgent. Heads snapped toward the sound. Sir Reinhardt stiffened. That signal. A second horn blast answered, followed by the pounding of hooves. The envoy's eyes narrowed. What is this? Who rides at such an hour? The guards hesitated, still holding Elizabeth by the arms. From beyond the gate, a troop of riders surged into view, cloaked figures bearing the crest of a distant but powerful house. Their banners cut through the icy wind like blades. The leading rider raised a scroll high above his head. I bear an emergency decree from King Ludwig himself, he shouted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The envoy went rigid. Sir Reinhardt stared, disbelief spreading across his face. And Elizabeth, her breath caught in her throat, felt the faintest flicker of hope ignite in her chest. It was the moment that would change everything, the moment that would shake Europe. The riders swept into the square like a storm breaking to the choir of a church, hooves hammering the frozen ground, cloaks snapped by the wind, breath rising from the horses in thick, furious plumes. The crowd instinctively shrank back. Even the envoy, who had moments before spoken with chilling authority, stiffened and stepped aside as if expecting the earth to open beneath him. The lead rider dismounted with a practiced, effortless swing. He wore a cloak of deep green, weighted by frost, and a sword at his hip whose hilt glinted with the unmistakable emblem of the royal household. Snow powdered his dark hair, but his posture was rigid as a blade. Sir Reinhardt recognized him instantly. Lord Albrecht von Hohenfeld, he murmured, stunned. Elizabeth had heard the name before, whispers of a young nobleman who had risen quickly in the king's court, known for both his iron discipline and his rigid loyalty to the crown. She watched him with wary confusion as he strode toward the platform, scroll still in hand. The envoy stepped forward, tried to mask his nervousness, and failed. Lord Albrecht, your presence here is unexpected. Albrecht didn't spare him a glance. His eyes, sharply intelligent, swept over the scene, the bound woman on the platform, the instruments in the wagon, the frozen faces of witnesses. His jaw tightened. Release her, he said. The command cracked across the square like a whip. Silence followed, heavy, breathless. The 2 guards gripping Elizabeth's arms exchanged glances, uncertain. The envoy bristled. My lord, The bishop's court is already declared. Albrecht broke the wax seal on the scroll, unfurled the parchment with a single sweeping motion, and read aloud with a voice that echoed off every stone wall. By decree of His Majesty King Ludwig IV, all charges against Elisabeth von Holzberg are suspended pending royal investigation. No corporal punishment is to be carried out. No public correction is to be administered. She is to be escorted under protection to Heidelberg for formal review before the Royal Council. A collective gasp surged through the square. Elizabeth's knees nearly gave out. The guards released her as if burned. The envoy's face drained of color. This is impossible. The bishop himself approved her sentence. The investigation was concluded. Albrecht lowered the scroll, his expression hard. The king has been informed that the charges may have been tainted by political influence. Sir Reinhardt inhaled sharply. Everyone knew those words. They were the polite version of a far uglier truth. The nobility had tried to bury a scandal. Elizabeth felt her heart hammering painfully inside her chest. Could it be? Had someone reached the king? Her father had been away for months on campaign. He could not have intervened. Who then? She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice faltered. The rush of everything, fear, humiliation, confusion, pressed against her throat like a tightening band. Albrecht stepped closer to the platform, eyes fixed on the envoy. "Your men will stand down," he ordered. "Should you proceed with the sentence after receiving a royal decree, it will be considered treason." Treason, a word that stripped the envoy of all remaining defiance. He dropped to one knee in a stiff, resentful bow. "We obey the king's will." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few women quietly wiped their eyes. Others whispered prayers of gratitude or disbelief. Men exchanged uneasy looks, calculating the implications. If the king had intervened here, then the old unspoken rule, that nobles could silence inconvenient truths by condemning women, had just been publicly challenged. Sir Reinhardt approached the platform, slower this time, careful. "Elizabeth," he began, voice thick with something like remorse. "I did not know this decree existed." She stared at him, 1,000 emotions battling inside her, but she said nothing. Albrecht extended a gloved hand to her. "Lady Elizabeth," he said, "you are now under the king's protection. You will come with me to Heidelberg at once." She hesitated. Her wrists were raw from the iron, and the cold cut deep into her bones. But she lifted her hand and placed it in his. The steadiness of his grip surprised her. It was firm, unyielding, but not cruel. As he helped her down from the platform, the crowd parted silently. Marta, the midwife, stepped forward, touching Elizabeth's arm gently. Tears glistened in her eyes. "Go with God, child," she whispered, "and may the truth be your shield." Elizabeth nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The envoy watched with burning resentment as Albrecht escorted her toward the horses. The moment they reached the edge of the square, he hurried to Sir Reinhardt, voice low and furious. This intervention, did her father arrange it? Did the king take interest in this woman for reasons we were not told? Sir Reinhardt shook his head. Her father is days away on campaign. And the king... He looked toward Albrecht's banner. The king would not involve himself lightly. The envoy paled. Then who informed him? Sir Reinhardt's gaze drifted back to Elizabeth, now being wrapped in a warm cloak by one of the royal riders. Her breath fog in the cold air, her eyes distant, overwhelmed. "It must have been someone at court," he murmured. "Someone with knowledge and motive." The ride out of Falkenstadt began at dusk, when the sky bruised itself into shades of violet and gray. Snow began to fall again, slow, drifting flakes that muffled the world as the royal escort led Elizabeth toward the open road. Albrecht rode beside her, forming a shield between her and the biting wind. For a long time neither spoke. At last Elizabeth asked, her voice hoarse. "Why did the king intervene for me? Who sent word to him?" Albrecht's expression darkened, though not with anger, more like caution. "There are those in the royal court who watch the movements of certain lords with interest," he said carefully. "And there are whispers that the charges against you were strategic." Elizabeth's pulse quickened. "Strategic?" "Your family holds lands that border the Rhine trade routes," he explained. "Influential lands. Lands that certain nobles wish to acquire." A hollow ache spread through her chest. So that was it. Her life had been threatened not only by injustice, but by greed. "Lady Elizabeth," Albrecht continued, his voice softened now, "I do not know who first carried word of your arrest to the king, but I know this. His Majesty does not tolerate the misuse of the law for personal gain. Your case struck a nerve." She swallowed hard. "Will he listen to me?" "He will," Albrecht said firmly. "But we must reach Heidelberg safely. Once word spreads of today's intervention, those who sought your punishment may attempt drastic measures." Elizabeth's fingers tightened around the reins. Danger still followed her. But for the first time since the nightmare began, she felt a flicker of strength, not hope exactly, but resolve. The snow thickened, the night deepened, and the road stretched ahead like a dark river leading into uncertainty. Yet Elizabeth lifted her gaze, watching the falling flakes blur the edges of the world, and whispered to herself, "I will not be buried. Not by fear, not by lies, not by the power of men who believed women were theirs to control." The journey was only beginning. Snow muffled the world into a hush as Elizabeth and the royal escort pressed deeper into the forest road. The trees rose on either side like ancient, skeletal sentinels, branches heavy with frost, trunks cracked by winter's cruelty. Only the rhythmic clop of hooves and the soft jingle of reins broke the quiet. The earlier chaos of the square, the dread of punishment, the shock of the king's decree, all of it seemed unreal now, swallowed by the darkness of the woods. But Elizabeth knew the danger had not passed. Albrecht rode beside her, straight-backed and alert, gaze constantly scanning the tree line. Even the horses sensed something amiss. They snorted and tossed their heads, uneasy. "How far until the next outpost?" she asked quietly. 2 hours if the snow worsens," Albrecht replied. "Less if the wind remains calm." She tried to nod, but exhaustion tugged at her neck. Her fingers trembled around the reins. The cloak he had given her helped, but the cold cut deep into her bone. Colder, somehow, than the day she had been dragged toward punishment. That cold had been fear. This cold was the chill of realization. Someone powerful wanted her erased. Someone powerful enough to manipulate a bishop. Powerful enough that the king himself had taken notice. And the forest, the vast, unlit, winding road, was the perfect place to finish what they had begun. They rode in silence for several minutes, until Albrecht spoke again, voice low. "Lady Elizabeth, you are still shivering." "I am well enough," she said. "I have endured worse." He glanced at her, brows knitting. "You should not have had to." The way he said it, quiet, but laced with iron, made her look at him fully for the first time. His jaw was set, but his eyes held something unexpected. Sincerity. "May I ask," she said cautiously, "why you came personally? The king could have sent any emissary." He hesitated, as though weighing how much truth to reveal. "His Majesty trusts me with matters requiring discretion," Albrecht said at last, "and he does not rely on many." That is not an answer. He exhaled, watching the cloud of his breath swirl away. "There are tensions at court," he admitted. "Factions rising. Alliances forming beneath the surface. Your arrest intersected with political currents far larger than Falkenstadt. If I had sent a lesser officer, he might have been bribed or killed before reaching you." Elizabeth's heartbeat stumbled. "So you came yourself to prevent my death?" To prevent injustice, Albrecht corrected. Yours, and perhaps others. The sentence lingered in the air, uncanny and heavy. But before Elizabeth could press further, one of the riders at the front raised a clenched fist. Halt! All horses jerked to a stop. Hooves dug into snow. Elizabeth's breath caught. The forest had gone silent, not peacefully silent, but waiting silent. The rider swung down from his saddle and knelt, brushing aside snow. Tracks, he said. Fresh, very fresh. Albrecht dismounted in an instant, motioning for Elizabeth to stay put. He crouched beside the tracks, tracing the indentation with gloved fingers. They were hoof prints, but not from their own horses. Too many, too chaotic, and the pacing suggested waiting in ambush. Elizabeth swallowed hard. They followed us. Albrecht stood, his expression turning steely. Not followed. They rode ahead, and now they surround us. The words had barely left his lips when the first arrow hissed from the dark. Down! Albrecht grabbed Elizabeth's arm and dragged her from the saddle just as the arrow thudded into the wood of her horse's saddle, inches from where her chest had been. Chaos erupted. More arrows sliced through the air. Horses reared. Riders shouted commands. Snow exploded into white bursts as the escort dismounted to form a shield around Elizabeth. From a shadowed forest emerged cloaked figures, faces covered, movements swift and purposeful. Their weapons gleamed despite the darkness. Bandits. Elizabeth whispered. No, Albrecht said grimly, drawing his sword. These men are too disciplined. Paid mercenaries. Sent by someone who wanted her gone. The mercenaries charged. Albrecht stepped forward like a wall of steel, sword flashing as he deflected the first strike. The clash of metal shattered the quiet. Stay behind us, he barked to Elizabeth, even as he parried another blow. But the mercenaries weren't aiming for the soldiers. They were aiming for her. A man broke through the defensive line, sprinting toward Elizabeth with a dagger raised high. Her breath froze. She stumbled back, falling to the snow, unable to process the movement fast enough. The man lunged. She felt a scream rising. A blade slashed downward, but before the dagger met flesh, a second blade intercepted it with metallic crack. Sir Reinhardt stood there, breathing hard, armor dented, eyes burning with something between fury and guilt. Elizabeth, he shouted. Run. She stared at him, stunned. Reinhardt? You followed. No time. He knocked the mercenary back, sending him tumbling into the snow. Go with the escort. Albrecht called out from behind her, fighting two attackers at once. Stay close to me. Elizabeth scrambled to her feet, legs trembling, and dragged herself toward him as the soldiers tightened formation. Steel clashed in every direction. Shouts, grunts, the hiss of arrows, the thud of bodies hitting the ground. But the mercenaries were skilled, too skilled. They moved with ruthless precision, and there were more of them than Albrecht had anticipated. A rider shouted, We're outnumbered. Albrecht slashed through another attacker. We break through. Form around Lady Elizabeth. We ride for the outpost. He grabbed her arm again, steadying her. Can you mount a horse? She nodded, though her knees buckled under her. A soldier boosted her into the saddle of a spare horse. Albrecht mounted beside her. Reinhardt fought his way toward them, blood streaking his cheek. I'll hold the rear. The group surged forward in a tight wedge, horses kicking up snow as they barreled toward the narrow path ahead. Arrows rained down, some thudding into trees, others into shields. A rider beside Elizabeth cried out and fell. She bit back a sob. The forest blurred around them as they rode hard, each second a heartbeat away from death. Only when the mercenary shouts began to fade behind them did Albrecht slow the pace slightly, though his posture remained rigid, eyes darting to every shadow. Elizabeth clung to the reins, chest heaving. They had tried to kill her. Here, now, without hesitation. And they would try again. Whoever seeks your death, Albrecht said between breaths, is becoming desperate. Reinhardt rode up beside them, face pale. They'll regroup. We need to reach the outpost before they cut us off again. Elizabeth swallowed a surge of nausea. How far? Albrecht looked at the dark path ahead. Farther than I would like. And as they pressed deeper into the forest, Elizabeth felt a chilling certainty settle in her bones. This was no longer a matter of justice. This was war. One declared in silence, fought in shadows, and aimed squarely at her. The only question now was how many would die before the truth surfaced. The outpost emerged in the darkness like a half-buried memory. Its wooden palisades coated in ice, its torches flickering between gusts of wind. Nestled in a clearing at the forest's edge, it was small, grim, and built more for endurance than comfort. A garrison of no more than 20 men occupied it. And even from afar, Elizabeth could sense the tension in the air as the outpost guards rushed to open the gates. "Hurry!" Albrecht urged the escort as the horses pushed through the narrow entry. "Lock it behind us." The gates thundered shut, the wooden beams dropping into place with a heavy thud. Albrecht dismounted in a single fluid motion and turned immediately to the captain on duty, a weatherman with frost in his beard. "We were attacked on the northern road," Albrecht reported. "Mercenaries trained, organized. They will pursue. Ready your archers. No one enters without my order." The captain nodded sharply and began shouting commands. Reinhardt slid off his horse with a grunt, clutching his ribs. Elizabeth rushed to him instinctively. "You're hurt," she said. "Only bruised," he managed, though his breath wavered. Better than the alternative. A soldier fetched him a cloak as he limped toward the fire pit at the center of the outpost. Elizabeth followed, her own limbs trembling from exhaustion. The attack had aged her years in a single hour. She felt it in her bones. Albrecht approached them, wiping blood, not his own, off his blade. "We have some time," he said. "Not much." Elizabeth sank onto a wooden bench near the fire. The heat stung as it met her frozen skin. Her mind spun with questions, but one burned brighter than the rest. "Why are they so desperate to kill me?" she asked. "If my lands are valuable, why not force a marriage alliance or take them through legal means? Why resort to this?" Reinhardt exchanged a grim look with Albrecht. "Because," Reinhardt said quietly, "a scandal involving the Baron's son cannot be resolved with legal means." Elizabeth's breath caught. She had suspected. She had heard the whispers. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing a soldier admit what the bishop's envoy had tried to bury, struck her like a blade. "So it is true," she whispered. "He tried to—" "Silence you," Albrecht finished, sparing her the word. "And when you resisted, you became a threat." Elizabeth stared into the fire, its flames dancing in violent orange waves. Reinhardt cleared his throat. "I should have intervened earlier. I should have spoken to the bishop's court." "You would have been stripped of your rank," Albrecht said. "Or killed." Reinhardt lowered his gaze. "Perhaps I deserve the risk." Elizabeth reached out and touched his arm, lightly, briefly. "You came for me today," she said. "You did not turn away." Reinhardt blinked, his eyes glistening with relief he would never admit. The fire crackled, filling the silence. After a few heavy moments, Albrecht took a seat across from her. "Lady Elizabeth, there is more you must know," he said. "And you deserve the truth now, before we face what comes next." She nodded slowly. Albrecht spoke with deliberate clarity, each word measured. "There are whispers in the court about a noble alliance forming in the West. Several lords seek to challenge the king's authority, not through war, but through control of trade routes, landholdings, and key political marriages. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. Your family's lands, Albrecht continued, control a crucial pass that connects the Rhine Valley to the Alpine routes. Whoever holds it gains enormous leverage, military and economic. So this isn't just revenge, she murmured. It's strategy. A brutal strategy, Albrecht said. If you had been publicly punished today, humiliated, broken, perhaps even executed, your lands would have passed to the next male heir. My cousin, Elizabeth whispered bitterly, who was already circling like a vulture. Albrecht nodded. He is aligned with one of the rebellious factions. Eliminating you was convenient. Elizabeth pressed her lips together, fighting a wave of nausea. She had always known her family's land was valuable, but never imagined it could make her the target of such calculated cruelty. So the attack tonight, she said, was their attempt to complete what the bishop began. Exactly. A gust of wind rattled the palisade walls. Soldiers moved along the ramparts with torches, scanning the forest. Every flicker of shadow tightened the air with dread. Elizabeth pulled her cloak tighter. Suddenly, despite the fire, she felt cold again, cold in her spirit, in her trust of the world. Albrecht watched her with a gaze that was not unkind. There's another matter, he said. She braced herself. What else? He hesitated. This rescue, the king's intervention, it was not spontaneous. Someone at court alerted him. Someone who knew the inner workings of your case. Someone with influence. And you still don't know who? She asked. No, he admitted. But I know this. That person is now in danger as well. Saving you was an act of defiance against powerful factions. Elizabeth gripped the edge of the bench. Then I have endangered them. You didn't endanger anyone, Albrecht said firmly. Your existence is not a crime. Your life is not a burden. She closed her eyes, exhaling shakily. Reinhardt stood with effort. I'll check the perimeter. When he left, Elizabeth turned back to Albrecht. If we reach Heidelberg, will I be safe? Safer, he said. The king's city is fortified, and his majesty himself will not allow harm to come to someone under his direct protection. He leaned forward. But the journey there will be perilous. They will not stop, not after the night. She nodded. Then I must endure. Albrecht watched her, his eyes softening. You have endured more already than most armies in the field. A small, humorless breath escaped her. Then let this be the end of my cowardice. You were never a coward. A horn blast shattered the moment. Sharp, urgent. Close. Elizabeth, a soldier shouted from the rampart. Movement in the trees. Albrecht's face hardened instantly. He sprang to his feet, hand on his sword. They've found us, he said. The soldiers scrambled, grabbing weapons, dousing the fire for tactical cover. Reinhardt rushed back into the clearing. They're circling the outpost, dozens of them. Albrecht turned to Elizabeth. His voice steady despite the rising chaos. You stay behind the inner barricade, he said. Do not move unless I come for you. She rose, trembling but resolute. I won't be helpless. Tell me what I can do. For a moment, his eyes locked with hers. Something fierce, protective, almost pain passing through them. Survive, he said. A shadow swept across the treetops. Arrows gleamed. And then the mercenaries emerged from the dark. The first arrow struck the palisade like hailstones hurled by an invisible hand. The wooden walls shuddered under the impact. Torches flickered violently, casting frantic shadows over the outpost. Elizabeth flinched at the sudden storm of sound, shouts, clattering steel, horses screaming in their stalls. Albrecht drew his sword and barked. Archers, return fire. Infantry, formed two defensive lines. Reinhardt seized a spear from a rack and moved toward the east wall. They're testing our defenses, he muttered grimly. They won't wait long before the real attack. Elizabeth stood behind the inner barricade as ordered, but the distance did nothing to ease a pounding in her chest. Her fingers dug into the rough wood. She felt trapped between two terrors, the enemy outside the walls and the helplessness coiling inside her. More arrows arced over the walls, dark streaks against the pale moon. One buried itself in the soldier's shoulder. He cried out, collapsing onto the snow. Another man dragged him behind cover. Albrecht's voice rose above the chaos, steady as a drumbeat. Hold the line. Then the mercenaries surged from the tree lean. Dozens of them, shadows with blades. Their boots pounded the earth as they fanned out. Shielding men with heavy rams pushed toward the gate. Others carried grappling hooks, their silhouettes stark against the moon as they hurled them over the walls. Steel scraped wood. Ropes tightened. "They're climbing," a guard shouted. "Cut them down." Reinhardt roared, driving his spear upward through a man's ribs. The attacker screamed and toppled backwards, crashing into the line behind him. Elizabeth's breath hitched. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The forest held death. The outpost held danger, and the night itself seemed to close in like a fist. A soldier stumbled near her, blood seeping from a sliced arm. Elizabeth rushed to him before she could think. "Sit! Press this," she urged, tearing a strip from her cloak to wrap around his wound. He blinked at her through pain. "My lady inside, please." "I will help where I can," she insisted, though fear clawed at her throat. A violent crash shook the gate. The mercenaries were slamming the ram into it with savage rhythm. Each impact echoed like thunder through the wooden structure. "Braces," Albrecht commanded. Men shoved thick beams into place behind the gate, reinforcing it. But it was splintered under another tremendous blow, and snow sifted from the beams. "They'll break through in minutes," Reinhardt warned. Albrecht's jaw tightened. "Then we hold for minutes, no less." The mercenaries scaled the walls with frightening speed. A hook clattered near Elizabeth, its iron claws biting into the wood. A masked man hauled himself up. Reinhardt lunged, ripping the hook free and kicking the man backward. The attacker fell with a sickening crack. Another mercenary vaulted over the opposite side. A soldier grappled with him, steel flashing in the firelight, but the mercenary twisted and slashed the soldier's throat. He turned toward the inner barricade, toward Elizabeth. Her breath seized. He charged. Elizabeth backed up. A single step, two, her body refusing to obey the frantic commands of her mind. She reached blindly for something, anything, to defend herself with. A crossbow bolt slammed into the mercenary's chest. He crumpled inches from her feet. A guard on the rampart lowered his weapon and shouted, "Stay behind cover, my lady." She nodded numbly, adrenaline roaring through her veins. The battle raged around her, like a storm breaking apart the world. Albrecht fought near the gate, cutting down attackers with ruthless precision. His movements were clean, efficient, no flourish, no hesitation. He fought like a man with everything to lose. Reinhardt battled at the wall, blood streaking his armor, but his grip never faltered. But the mercenaries kept coming. More ropes flew over the walls. More attackers clawed their way upward. The ram smashed into the gate again. Splinters flew like shrapnel. Albrecht glanced back at Elizabeth. Even amid the chaos, he shouted her name with fierce command. "Elizabeth, down!" She ducked an instant before an arrow whistled over her head and buried into the barricade. Her heart thundered. She pressed herself against the wooden shield, breath ragged. She tasted iron, fear, or blood. She couldn't tell. A moment later, Albrecht appeared beside her, sword dripping with red. "You must move," he said urgently. "They are focusing on your position." "Then I should not be hiding," she said, trembling but resolute. I should live. He cut in sharply. That is your duty right now. He grasped her arm and pulled her toward a lower wall of crates stacked as a secondary barricade. Stay here. If they breach the gate, run for the tower. Do not stop. Before she could respond, a deafening crack split the night. The gate buckled inward. Snow and debris burst into the outpost. The men on the ram surged forward, stepping over the fallen wood as the defensive line collapsed. The mercenaries stormed in with terrifying force. Fall back, Albrecht commanded. Second line, hold. Reinhardt sprinted toward the breach, intercepting 2 attackers with vicious blows. Albrecht and the remaining soldiers formed a desperate shield wall, shoved back step by step toward Elizabeth's position. She watched it unfold in a haze of horror. The world narrowed to flashes of metal, bodies lunging, men shouting, blood painting the snow. A mercenary broke through the chaos and charged straight for her. No! Albrecht roared. He lunged, intercepting the man before he reached her. Their swords clashed. Once, twice. The mercenary slashed Albrecht's shoulder. Albrecht gritted his teeth, twisted, and drove his blade through the man's chest. He fell, but Albrecht staggered. Blood seeped through his cloak. Elizabeth, he gasped. Go now. She grabbed his arm, instinct overpowering fear. I won't leave you. You must, he shouted. Reinhardt stumbled toward them, face pale with exhaustion. The tower, go! Before Elizabeth could run, a horn sounded in the distance, a deep, resonant blast. Then another. The mercenaries faltered. Some turned, some cursed. Albrecht whipped his head toward the forest, eyes widening. That is a royal signal. A moment later, horses thundered through the tree line. Royal banners streamed behind them. Soldiers in the king's colors surged toward the outpost, charging the mercenaries from behind with devastating force. Reinforcements. Elizabeth collapsed against a barricade, breath breaking in relief she thought she might never feel again. Albrecht leaned heavily on his sword, blood staining the snow at his feet. Reinhardt exhaled a long, shaking breath. We're saved. But as Elizabeth looked at the fallen, the burning torches, the shattered gate, she felt no triumph, only the chilling realization. Someone had been willing to kill an entire outpost just to silence one woman, and the war that had begun in darkness was now spilling into the open. Dawn bled slowly across the sky, turned the frost-covered earth into a pale sheet of silver. The fires of the ruined outpost still smoldered behind them as Albrecht, Reinhardt, Elizabeth, and a handful of surviving guards prepared to ride. The moment felt heavy, like a door closing behind them, locking away everything they had endured and everything they could never return to. Albrecht sat mounted, face pale beneath the morning light. His bandaged shoulder was stained and stiff, but he stayed upright through sheer will. Reinhardt had argued that he should remain behind until a healer could tend him properly, but Albrecht had refused. Every hour we delay, he said through clenched teeth, is another hour the enemy gains ground, and another hour the truth slips further beyond reach. The truth, that was what weighed on all of them. The mercenaries at the outpost had not been wandering marauders. They were too organized, too well-equipped, and the crest etched into the captain's gauntlet. A serpent coiled around a throne, still burned in Reinhardt's mind. Elizabeth rode between them, wrapped in a borrowed cloak, her face hidden beneath its hood. Her wrists were still raw from the chains, but she sat tall and silent, lost in thoughts she dared not speak. Every mile carried her further from a life she once knew and deeper into a world she barely understood. As they rode onto the King's Road, a long, winding path that cut through forests and frozen plains, Reinhardt kept glancing toward the tree line. Something felt wrong. Too quiet, too still, as if the world were holding its breath. A tense march. By midday, the cold sharpened. Albrecht's breath came ragged. Reinhardt, noticing him sway, called out, "We stop here." "We do not." Albrecht snapped, though his grip convulsed on the reins. "The capital is still 3 days off. And you won't survive 3 days at this pace." Reinhardt countered, already signaling the men a halt. Elizabeth dismounted quickly and hurried to Albrecht's side. "Please, just rest a little. Your wound is worsening." His eyes softened when he looked at her, though he seemed ashamed of it. He allowed himself to be helped down from the horse, wincing as he sat against a tree. Sweat slicked his brow despite the cold. Reinhardt approached Elizabeth quietly. "Can you tend to him?" She nodded. "If I have clean water." A guard brought snow in a kettle, melting it over a small flame. As she worked, unwrapping the bandage, Albrecht hissed with pain. "You should not be doing this," he murmured. Elizabeth shook her head gently. "Had you not been there, I would be dead. Let me return a fraction of that mercy." Her touch was steady, but inside her chest, fear coiled tight. The wound was deeper than she'd realized, and streaks of red spidered outward beneath the skin, a sign of fever creeping in. Reinhardt watched them both, arms folded, jaw clenched. He had spent a lifetime believing that loyalty to the crown could not be questioned, yet the events of the last days gnawed at him. Someone powerful wanted Elizabeth silenced, someone within the court, and if Albrecht was right, if the mercenaries belonged to a hidden faction rising against the king, then the danger was far greater than any of them had imagined. The message in the snow. They rested only an hour before setting out again. The road ahead cut through dense forest, shadows stretching long and thin between the trees. The horses' hooves crunched softly. No bird sang. Elizabeth drifted behind the others, unease curling within her. The forest felt suffocating, as though every branch leaned in to listen. Halfway through the pass, Reinhardt raised a fist, halting the column. "What is it?" Elizabeth whispered. He pointed to the snow. Fresh tracks, deep and spaced irregularly, like someone had been running. Albrecht dismounted, ignoring the pain, and crouched beside them. Human, barefoot. Elizabeth repeated in disbelief. Reinhardt's expression darkened. "And fleeing." The tracks led into the thicker woods. Then, faintly, so faintly most wouldn't have heard it, a crack sounded, a branch snapping, followed by breathing, fast, desperate. Reinhardt motioned for silence. He moved cautiously toward the sound, sword drawn. The others followed at a distance. When he stepped past a pine tree, he froze. There, curled in the hollow between two roots, was a girl, no older than 16. Her dress was torn, her hair matted, her feet bleeding from cold and stone. She stared up at them with wild, terrified eyes. "Please," she croaked, voice shredded. "Don't let them take me back." Albrecht stepped forward slowly. Who is after you?" She lifted a shaking hand and pointed behind her, deeper into the maze of trees. "The men with the black serpent," she whispered. Reinhardt's blood ran cold. Albrecht swore under his breath. Elizabeth felt her lungs tighten. The girl continued, voice cracking. "They came to our village 3 nights ago. They said the king had lost God's favor, that a new order would rise. They took anyone who resisted. I escaped only because my brother fought them, bought me time." She broke, sobbing. Elizabeth knelt beside her, wrapping her cloak around the girl's shaking shoulders. "You're safe now. We won't let them hurt you." But Reinhardt wasn't so sure. The woods felt alive with danger. And then they heard it. Hoofbeats. Many, growing louder. Albrecht swayed to his feet. "No, already?" Reinhardt grabbed Elizabeth's arm. "We have to move. Now." But it was too late. The forest erupted with the thunder of riders as dark-cloaked men burst through the trees, their armor bearing the unmistakable sigil. A serpent coiled around a throne. The faction hunting them had found them again, and this time they came in force. The ambush. Protect the girl, Albrecht shouted, wincing but drawing his sword. Reinhardt pulled Elizabeth behind a fallen log. Stay with me. Do not leave my sight. The enemy riders charged, steel glinting. Arrows whistled through the air. A guard beside them fell with a cry. Reinhardt pushed Elizabeth flat to the snow as an arrow thudded into the tree above them. The girl they'd rescued screamed. Chaos erupted, horses rearing, men shouting, blades clashing. The forest rang with violence. Albrecht fought through pain and fever, his sword flashing desperately, but he staggered, vision wavering. An enemy rider bore down on him. Albrecht. Elizabeth screamed. Reinhardt lunged, intercepting the strike at the last second. Sparks flew as steel met steel. You're in no condition to fight. Reinhardt bellowed. Albrecht coughed hard, blood speckling the snow. If we fall here, it ends. All of it. The truth dies with us. The enemy riders circled, closing in. They were outnumbered, outmatched, surrounded. Then, from deep within the woods, a horn sounded, a different horn, and torches flared in the trees. Figures emerged, armored, disciplined, bearing the royal crest of King Ludwig. Reinforcements. Elizabeth gasped in relief as the king's soldiers slammed into the ambushers, scattering them. Steel clashed, shouts echoed, and within minutes the tide turned. The dark-cloaked enemy realized defeat and fled into the trees like specters. The forest fell silent again. Elizabeth rushed to Albrecht as he collapsed to his knees. He smiled weakly. Seems we were expected. A captain of the royal guard approached, bowing stiffly. We were dispatched by the king himself, he said. There is urgent news, news that changes everything. Reinhardt narrowed his eyes. What news? The captain looked at Elizabeth. The king has learned the truth of the accusations against her and the conspiracy behind them. Elizabeth's heart stopped. Albrecht's eyes widened. Reinhardt stepped closer, voice low and sharp. What truth? The captain lowered his voice, as though the trees themselves were listening. Your enemies are not finished, he said grimly, and their reach is far greater than we feared. The air felt thicker as the royal soldiers guided them out of the forest and back toward the king's road. Even after the enemy riders had vanished, the tension clung to the group like a second skin. Snow fell in drifting sheets, softening the landscape but doing nothing to ease the dread sitting in every heartbeat. Albrecht slumped in the saddle, breathing raggedly, kept upright only by the soldier riding beside him. His fever blazed. Elizabeth rode close, unable to keep the panic from knotting her chest. Every mile drained him deeper. Reinhardt rode ahead, speaking with the captain, a stern man named Wolfram, whose armor bore fresh scorches and dents, signs of battles fought before dawn. Elizabeth urged her horse forward until she drew beside them. What did you mean, she asked Wolfram, about the king learning the truth of my accusation? Wolfram's gaze flickered to her, then to Reinhardt, and finally to Albrecht. His jaw tightened. The accusations were fabricated, he said flatly. The king received word from one of his own scribes, secretly, at great risk, that the charges were born from political pressure. A faction within the court wanted you silenced. Elizabeth's fingers tightened around her reins. Reinhardt's voice was low, cold. Who in the court would risk treason to destroy a noblewoman? The same faction that sent assassins after us, Wolfram replied. The same serpent-marked traitors who attacked the outposts. He exhaled sharply. This rebellion is not rumor. It is real, organized, and growing. And they want something something that requires her gone. Elizabeth felt the world tilt. She had always known her trial was unjust, but never had she imagined her fate was entangled in a conspiracy large enough to shake the kingdom. Albrecht coughed violently behind her. She twisted in her saddle. "His condition is worsening," she said. "He cannot travel much longer." Wolfram nodded. "Then we will make camp. The king's orders will bring you all safely to the capital, alive." His tone implied that would not be easy. A restless night. A clearing sheltered them from the wind. Tents rose quickly. Fires crackled. The rescued girl, still shell-shocked, was wrapped in blankets and guarded closely. Elizabeth insisted on tending to Albrecht. She worked by firelight, carefully washing the wound, though his shivering worsened. "You should sleep," she murmured. Albrecht shook his head weakly. "There is something I must tell you before we reach the capital." "Tell me when you're stronger," she replied softly, brushing damp hair from his forehead. No, his voice strained. "Now." She blinked, heart pounding. Albrecht closed his eyes tightly, summoning strength. "The Serpent faction. They are not simple rebels. They have nobles, clergy, merchants, all united by one belief, that the king has grown weak, that women are gaining too much influence in the courts and guilds. Your case was used as a symbol, a lesson." Elizabeth's breath hitched. A lesson meant to terrify all women, a warning of what happened to those who spoke too boldly. Her punishment meant to ignite fear. "How far does this conspiracy go, Albrecht?" He swallowed painfully. "Farther than anyone suspects. And they have a leader, someone with access to the court, someone with power." His voice wavered. "Someone your own family once trusted." Elizabeth felt her blood turn cold. "Who?" But Albrecht winced, eyes closing, drifting into fevered half-consciousness. Reinhardt appeared behind her, voice rough. "Let him rest. If he speaks now, he may not survive to reach the capital." Elizabeth lowered her head, trembling. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why would these men move heaven and earth to silence a single woman?" Reinhardt hesitated, then knelt before her. "You think this is about your trial?" he murmured. "You underestimate your own importance, Elizabeth." She looked up confused. Reinhardt lowered his voice. "Your knowledge, your literacy, your courage to speak in public, it scares them. They see you as a spark, and they fear that spark will become a flame." Elizabeth stared at him, stunned. But before she could answer, a horn sounded from the outskirts of the camp. Wolfram rose instantly, scouts returning. 2 soldiers stumbled into the firelight, panting, snow clinging to their cloaks. "Captain," one gasped, "they're coming." "Who?" Wolfram demanded. The scouts swallowed hard. "The Serpent Riders, an entire company of them. They're tracking us." "How far?" Reinhardt barked. 2 hours, maybe less." Camp erupted into motion. Soldiers shouted orders. Horses were saddled. Fires doused. Wolfram strode to them. "We ride now. No stopping again until we reach the capital." Reinhardt hauled Albrecht onto his horse, tied him in place so he wouldn't fall. The rescued girl climbed onto another mount. Elizabeth mounted quickly, though her hands trembled. Reinhardt leaned toward her. "Stay close to me, no matter what." She nodded, but fear clawed at her insides. The race toward dawn. They galloped through night, the forest a blur of black shapes. Snow lashed their faces. The ground trembled beneath the pounding hooves. Behind them, faint but unmistakable, the cry of horns pierced the darkness. The Serpent Riders. Elizabeth's heart slammed in her chest. She looked back, just once, and saw torches weaving between the trees like hungry fireflies. Reinhardt rode beside her, jaw clenched. "They're faster than we thought." Wolfram shouted ahead. There's a bridge 2 miles forward. Once we cross, we can burn it behind us. But as they neared the river valley, a horrifying sight awaited them. Smoke, fire. The bridge ahead was already burning. Elizabeth's breath caught. No, no, this can't be. Wolfram swore. They're trying to cut us off. Reinhardt slowed his horse, scanning desperately. There must be another path. There is, one soldier said grimly, but it goes through the ravine. Wolfram whipped around. The ravine? In this weather? It could collapse. Captain, Reinhardt growled, we have no time. Torches blazed behind them. Closer than ever, Wolfram made his choice. To the ravine. The column veered sharply into the narrow pass. The path was treacherous. 2 icy ledges with a roaring frozen river far below. Snow crumbled under hooves. Elizabeth's horse slipped. She gasped, but Reinhardt steadied her. We're almost through, he shouted. But as they reached the final bend, the cliff shook violently, a thunderous crack echoing across the ravine. Wolfram's eyes widened. The serpents! They fired the ridge. Explosive fire burst above them as flaming debris rained down. Reinhardt shielded Elizabeth with his body. The cliffside groaned, splintered, and then a massive section of rock gave way. The path behind them collapsed, burying the serpent riders in roaring stone. But the path ahead shattered too. A jagged canyon opened before them. The entire pass collapsed, splitting their group in two. Elizabeth found herself on a narrow ledge with Reinhardt. Albrecht slumped on his horse, the rescued girl, and only 3 soldiers. The others were stranded across the falling rubble. Wolfram shouted across the widening gap, "Ride east. Follow the merchant road. It leads straight to the capital, Joe." Reinhardt's horse reared as rocks tumbled at their heels. He turned to Elizabeth. "This is it," he said hoarsely. "No more hiding. No more running." His eyes burned with determination. "We see this through. To the end." Elizabeth swallowed hard and nodded. Behind them, the serpent riders clawed their way out of the rubble. The final confrontation was approaching, faster than any of them were ready for. The eastern horizon glowed a bruised purple as a small, battered group emerged from the ravine's ruins. Their horses were trembling, sides heaving from exhaustion. The rescued girl clung to her reins with bloodless knuckles. Albrecht slumped dangerously, barely conscious. Snow began falling harder, each flake a whisper of cold and warning. Reinhardt turned to the others. "We have 1 day, maybe less, before the serpents reach us again." "And the capital?" Elizabeth asked, breath misting in the frigid air. "Half a day beyond the merchant road," he replied, "if we keep moving." His voice cracked from battle and strain, but something in his gaze remained unbroken. Hope, perhaps, or a belief that what they carried, truth, was worth dying for. They pressed on, the road of beggars and witnesses. As they reached the wider merchant road, Elizabeth noticed something strange. Travelers, merchants, peasants, monks were gathered along the roadside, murmuring, pointing at the soldiers' battered armor, the serpent insignias on the slain riders' gear. A bearded peddler stepped forward, bowing nervously. "Good sirs, good lady, we've heard rumors that a rebellion walks the land, that women are be purged for sins of defiance." His voice trembled. "Is it true?" Elizabeth's throat tightened. She looked at Reinhardt. He nodded once, allowing truth its place. "It is true," she said, turning to the crowd. "There are men who claim God supports their cruelty, who fear women's voices, who fear any change that threatens their power. They would silence us, all of us." A ripple of fear, and something else, something hotter, stronger, ran through the listeners. A washerwoman shoved forward, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. "Let them try," she spat bitterly. We've lived under their heel long enough. Others murmured agreement. Elizabeth felt something shift, not in the kingdom, but in the people. They want to destroy me, she continued, because they believe an educated woman is a spark. But sparks become flames when they reach dry kindling. She did not shout. She didn't need to. Every person leaned in, breath held. Reinhardt watched her with quiet awe. Albrecht, half-conscious, murmured, This is why they feared you. And as the travelers parted to let them pass, many whispered blessings, prayers, promises of safety. Some whispered a single word, hope. Elizabeth had never known a word could weigh so much or lift so much. The walls of judgment. By dusk, they reached the capital. Tall spires pierced the sky, glowing amber in the setting sun. The city gates swarmed with soldiers, and upon seeing Wolfram's royal crest, the guards opened the way without hesitation. But something was wrong. Torches burned too brightly. Voices echoed in tense clusters. And above the main courtyard, the king's banner fluttered beside another, one Elizabeth had never seen. Crimson, with a serpent. Reinhardt hissed sharply. They've infiltrated the capital itself. Albrecht groaned weakly. We must reach the king before they reach us. They rode hard to the inner keep. There Wolfram and his men, who had taken the alternative route, were waiting. He approached quickly. The king is alive, Wolfram said, but the conspirators have forced half the court into silence. They claim the king has agreed to new moral reforms. They intend to make your punishment public today. Elizabeth stared at him, heart plummeting. What? Reinhardt stepped in front of her, fury radiating off him. Over my dead body. That a new voice said behind them can be arranged. They turned. A man stepped forward, flanked by armored guards bearing the serpent insignia. His robes marked him as high nobility, silken crimson embroidered with gold. Elizabeth recognized him instantly. Lord Dietmar von Holzberg, her father's cousin, a man who had always smiled too easily and bowed too deeply. He smiled now, cold and triumphant. Elizabeth, you caused quite the inconvenience. Her stomach dropped. You orchestrated my trial. He spread his hands lightly. You read where you were forbidden. You argued where you were expected to be silent. And you brought shame upon our house by rejecting the advances of powerful men. You forced my hand. Reinhardt's sword flashed out. Your hand should be cut from your body. Dietmar didn't flinch. You think you can save her? Half the court stand with us. We are the rightful hand of order. The king has grown weak. But she is the symbol we need. The reminder. Elizabeth whispered, trembling, the warning. Dietmar smirked. Exactly. Albrecht groaned and tried to rise, but crumpled. Dietmar barely glanced at him. Take her, he ordered. Guards advanced. Reinhardt roared, charging. Wolfram's soldiers surged forward. The courtyard exploded into chaos. Steel clashing, torches falling, snow erupting under boots. Elizabeth ducked as a sword swung over her head. She grabbed a fallen spear, heart hammering. A guard lunged. Reinhardt intercepted, driving his blade clean through the man's chest. Elizabeth, go! He shouted. Find the king. She didn't hesitate. She ran. The hall of crown and conspiracy. She burst through the great hall doors. The king, elderly, weary, but still regal, sat upon the throne, 2 serpent guards flanking him. Court nobles lined the walls, terrified and silent. Dietmar followed behind her moments later, breathless but smiling. She comes willingly, he lied to the room, to receive the judgment decreed by the crown. Elizabeth stepped into the center of the hall. No, she said, to reveal the truth. Dietmar's smile evaporated. Elizabeth faced the king directly. Your Majesty, I was condemned under false testimony. My accusers sought not justice, but control, and they planned to overthrow you. A gasp rippled through the nobles. Dietmar raised a hand. She is delusional. The serpent order only seeks. Silence, the king commanded. His voice, frail but sharp, cut the hall clean. He stood slowly. Bring her forward. Elizabeth stepped closer, heart pounding. But behind her, the door slammed open. Reinhardt entered, bloody but alive, dragging a half-conscious Albrecht. Wolfram followed with dozens of loyal guards. Dietmar paled. The king descended from the dais. Looking into Elizabeth's eyes, he spoke clearly. The conspiracy has been uncovered. Your name is cleared. Elizabeth exhaled shakily. Relief, grief, disbelief all crashing together. Dietmar lunged for her in desperation. Reinhardt struck him down before he reached her, his blade sharp and final. The hall erupted. Soldiers overwhelming the remaining conspirators. Nobles sobbing in relief. The rescued girl collapsing into Wolfram's arms. And Elizabeth, she stood in stunned silence as the king addressed her. Your courage, he said, has saved this kingdom. And in doing so, you've shown what they feared most, that a woman's voice once raised can shake nations. Her eyes filled with tears, not of weakness, of finally being seen. After the storm, days later, order slowly returned to the kingdom. Dietmar's faction was dismantled, the serpent insignia outlawed. Reforms introduced to protect those once silenced by fear. Albrecht recovered, thanks, in part, to Elizabeth rarely leaving his side. Reinhardt was knighted for loyalty beyond duty. And Elizabeth, she was offered a place in the royal council as an advisor on matters of justice and education. She accepted with trembling hands and a heart heavier and stronger than ever before. As she walked through the palace courtyard one evening, snow drifting like feathers, she paused, watching the torches flicker. Once, those flames had terrified her. Now, they reminded her of something else. A spark does not choose to be born, but once born, it can ignite a world. And Elizabeth vowed that no woman, no person, would ever again suffer the terror she had faced. Not while she lived, not while her story endured.